9. Underwater Station. The underwater Wildschutz Lake Station is a unique project started by Volker Bassen, a diver from East Germany. He built it in 2017 out of recycled materials like an old bus and a crane. The station has 2 levels, one for living and working and another for diving equipment. It can host up to 4 people at a time. The station is powered with solar panels and batteries and comes with its own communication system. Wildschutz is used for research and education purposes, as well as recreational dives. Volker Bassen hopes that his station will inspire more people to explore the underwater world, to learn more about its never-ending mysteries and beauty. The lake is about 131 feet deep and has many attractions for curious divers, such as sunken cars, boats, and planes. Some of them have been intentionally placed by Volker Bassen to create artificial reefs and habitats for fish and other aquatic life. The station is found in the Bavarian Forest National Park, one of the 16 national parks in Germany that protect the natural heritage of the country. The park covers 94 square miles and features diverse landscapes like mountains, forests, meadows, and rivers. 8. The 9-pound goldfish of Oak Grove Lake. Oak Grove Lake is a small body of water east of Greenville, South Carolina. It's a popular site for fishing, boating, and picnicking. But it also has a surprising resident living inside it, a 9-pound, 4-kilogram goldfish. The goldfish was first discovered on November 16, 2020 by Scott Robinson, a lake specialist hired by the Greenville County Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism. He was conducting electrofishing, a method of measuring the health of a fish population by sending electric currents through the water. As he was pulling out bass and catfish from his net, he noticed something orange among them. It was a huge goldfish about 15 inches long. He took a photo of it before releasing it back into the lake. The photo quickly went viral on social media, with many people wondering how such a big goldfish ended up in Oak Grove Lake. Some believed it was someone's pet that was dumped when it grew too big for its tank. Others suggested it was an invasive species that could harm the native fish. But Ty Hook, Director of Greenways and Natural and Historic Resources for the county department, claimed the goldfish was not a threat to the lake's ecosystem. He said goldfish are actually native to Asia and can grow very large in natural waters. He also said it seemed healthy and happy in the environment. The 9-pound goldfish of Oak Grove Lake is a rare and remarkable sight. It shows how nature can adapt and thrive even in the most unexpected places. 7. Siphonophores, the longest animals on Earth. Try to imagine a creature that looks like a string of lights swimming around and glowing in the dark depths of the ocean. It may seem like a fairy tale, but a creature like this exists. It's called a siphonophore, and it's one of the most fascinating animals on Earth. A siphonophore is not a single animal, but a colony of tiny animals called zooids. Each zooid has a specific function: floating, capturing prey, feeding, or reproducing. They're all genetically identical clones that form by budding off each other. Together, they work as one unique organism. They have stinging cells called nematocysts that they use to catch fish and other prey. Some siphonophores also have bioluminescent cells that create light to attract and confuse predators. The creatures are found in every ocean, from shallow waters to deep seas. They come in different shapes and sizes. The longest known siphonophore species is Apolemia uvaria, which can grow up to 150 feet long. That's longer than a blue whale. Siphonophores are mysterious creatures that scientists are trying to understand better. They're incredible examples of how nature can create complex and beautiful life forms out of simple building blocks. 6. A 7-room, fully furnished vacation house. It was supposed to be a dream come true. A 7-room, fully furnished vacation home on Madeline Island in Lake Superior. The owners bought the house for a bargain and hired a trucking company to transport it across the frozen lake during March 2023. But something went wrong. The truck broke through the ice and dragged the house down with it, leaving a gaping hole and a trail of debris. The driver escaped, but the house was lost forever in the lake. The incident made headlines across the country and sparked a debate about the safety of moving houses on ice roads. Some blamed the trucking company for negligence and recklessness, while others defended their right to use a cost-effective method of transportation. The owners were devastated by their loss and filed a lawsuit against the company for damages. They claimed they invested their life savings into buying and furnishing the home. The owners said that they planned to use it as a family getaway and rent it out to tourists. The trucking company denied any wrongdoing and argued that they followed all the regulations and precautions for ice road travel. They even said that they checked the ice thickness and weather conditions before the journey, and that they had no way of knowing there was a weak spot on the lake. The case is still pending in court, but some curious divers have ventured into Lake Superior to explore the sunken house. They found intact furniture, appliances, dishes, books, and even personal belongings inside. They've also captured stunning photos and videos of what they call the most unique underwater attraction on Lake Superior. It's certainly a sight to see. 5. Real-life SpongeBob and Patrick spotted in Atlantic Ocean. SpongeBob SquarePants and Patrick Star are two of the most popular cartoon characters ever. But did you know that they have real-life counterparts in the ocean? In July 2021, a team of researchers from NOAA's Oceanos explorer ship found a yellow sea sponge and a pink starfish sitting next to each other on the seafloor. The sponge and starfish looked very similar to SpongeBob and Patrick, and their photo immediately went viral on social media. The researchers were exploring the Retriever Seamount, one of 4 underwater mountains in the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. They used a remotely operated vehicle, ROV, to collect data and images of the deep-sea ecosystem. The sponge belongs to the genus Hudvigia, while the starfish belongs to the genus Chondrithyes. They're both common species in deep-sea habitats, but they rarely interact with each other. Actually, these starfish are predators that feed on sponges by dissolving them externally with their arms. So why were they sitting so close together? The researchers think it could just be a coincidence or a result of ocean currents. They also noted that sponges can produce chemical defenses to deter predators, so maybe SpongeBob was hiding some tricks up his sleeve. What would you do if you saw a real-life SpongeBob and Patrick? Let us know in the comments, and if you liked the video so far, be sure to subscribe to the channel. 4. Underwater river wrapped in poison. An underwater river happens when a layer of dense water flows under a layer of less dense water, creating what looks like a river under the sea. One of the most incredible examples of this is the Cenote Angelita in Mexico, which contains a distinct underwater river that flows 98 feet below the surface. This river, where salt water meets fresh water, is covered by a thick cloud of hydrogen sulfide. The toxic gas smells like rotten eggs and can kill a person if breathed in. The hydrogen sulfide forms when organic matter decays at the bottom of the cenote. The result is a surreal and eerie landscape that attracts divers from around the world. Another type of underwater river is an underwater sediment river, which is a flow of sand and mud on the seafloor. These rivers can be large and powerful, carrying huge amounts of sediment over long distances. One of the most active undersea sediment rivers is found in the Nazaré Canyon off the coast of Portugal. The river runs down a narrow channel inside the 5-mile-wide canyon before branching off into a fan-shaped delta at its mouth. The Nazaré Canyon River transports more sediment than any other undersea river. These rivers play an important role in shaping the seafloor and influencing marine ecosystems around the world. 3. Shipwreck on top of another shipwreck. The Hudson River is full of history and home to many secrets, but one of them is especially interesting: a shipwreck on top of another shipwreck. The upper vessel is a cabin cruiser, a small motorboat that was popular during the mid-20th century. The lower ship is much older, probably from the 1800s. How did these two boats end up in such a strange position, and what stories do they hold? The exact location of this underwater oddity is kept secret by experienced divers, but some clues can be found in historical records and news reports. The cabin cruiser is likely one of many boats that sank during Hurricane Donna in 1960, which caused widespread damage on the East Coast. The storm brought strong winds and waves that capsized many vessels on the Hudson River. Some of them were never recovered. The older sailing ship may have been part of New York's maritime history, when the city was a bustling port for trade and immigration. It could have been involved in commerce, war, or exploration. One possible candidate is the SS Savannah, which was built in 1818 near Brooklyn and became the first steamship to cross the Atlantic Ocean in 1819. These two ships represent different eras, but they share a common fate. They rest at the bottom of the river, forgotten by most people, but fascinating for those interested. They're like time capsules, preserving a glimpse into New York's past. 2. The underwater gnome garden of Wastwater. Wastwater is a body of water in England's Lake District National Park. It's the deepest lake in the country, reaching a depth of nearly 260 feet. It's known for its stunning scenery, with steep cliffs and surrounding mountains. But Wastwater has another attraction hidden from most visitors: an underwater gnome garden. This mysterious feature consists of several gnomes arranged around a picket fence, some holding fishing rods and others having a tea party. The gnomes are colorful and cheerful, contrasting with the dark and dreary water. The origin of the gnome garden is unclear. Some say it was built by divers as a prank or a tribute to a friend who died. Others say it was inspired by a similar gnome garden on Switzerland's Lake Zurich. The gnomes have been there for many years and have been added to by different divers over time. The gnome garden has become a popular destination for explorers who want to see something unusual and whimsical. But it's also dangerous. The depth of the lake poses serious risks for decompression sickness and hypothermia. Several divers have lost their lives trying to see the gnome garden. In the late 1990s, police divers were instructed to remove the site after 3 divers died, but some gnomes remained or were replaced later on. The gnome garden still exists today, but its exact location is kept secret. It serves as a fascinating example of how humans can create art and humor even in the most unlikely places. 1. The wonders of the ocean. The ocean is full of mysteries as explorers and scientists discover new and strange things each year. Some of these include living creatures that have adapted to survive in extreme conditions like high pressure, low light, and cold temperatures. For example, a blood red jellyfish, which was a previously unknown species, a glass octopus which is transparent and elusive, a shape-shifting whalefish that changes its appearance and sex, a spindly squid with long arms and tentacles, a giant phantom jellyfish, and others. Some of these discoveries are not alive, but are still fascinating. For example, ancient cities that were submerged by rising sea levels, like Thonis Heraclean in Egypt or the Yonaguni Monument in Japan. Human skeletons that may have been victims of accidents, crimes, or natural disasters. Shipwrecks that tell stories of history and tragedy. Meteors that crash into the ocean floor. Alien spaceships that look like flying saucers. And underwater icicles. These are just some examples of weird things found in the ocean. There may be many more that we don't know about just yet. The ocean covers over 70% of our planet's surface, but we've only explored about 5% of it. 5. P-40 Warhawk. The United States of America started the Lend-Lease program in 1941. It was aimed at helping the Allied forces in their fight against the Germans during World War II. Between 1941 and 1945, the US supplied the Soviet Union with $11.3 billion worth of supplies, and the P-40 Warhawk was just one model out of more than 14,000 airplanes that were given to the USSR. The Warhawk was an American-made single-engine fighter with a wingspan measuring 37 feet, and it had a length of 33.5 feet. It boasted two M2 Browning machine guns and carried up to 2,000 pounds of bombs. And during the war, Joseph Stalin's Red Army had a total of 313 of the P-40 warplanes on lease from the United States. In 2017, during the construction of the Crimean Bridge, a crew of workers were searching for old mines or unexploded ordnance when they discovered a P-40 Warhawk in the Kerch Peninsula. During World War II, the Kerch Peninsula saw some fierce fighting between the Nazis and Stalin's Red Army. The Warhawk, they found, was certainly down during one of these fierce battles. The aircraft rested in its shallow grave for over 70 years until the construction crew uncovered it. Upon being raised, it was transported to undergo renovations, and it's been reported that it'll be displayed in a military history exhibit sometime in the future. 4. Ice worm. Russian researchers collected 300 samples of soil from the Arctic in 2018. The frozen specimens, which were found in diverse places, were representative of several geological ages. Back in the lab, worms were found in some of the samples, and they were dated to be 42,000 years old. They were known as nematodes, and they'd spent over 40 millennium frozen solid inside the permafrost. The little critters were transferred to a petri dish and were left for several weeks at a temperature of 68 degrees Fahrenheit so they could defrost. Amazingly, the worms gradually showed signs of life. The petri dish the worms were left in contained a nutritional medium. The nematodes apparently had no idea that they'd basically been brought back from the dead after thousands of years, as they began to eat as if nothing had happened. This incredible achievement established the benchmark for successful animal cryogenic suspension. It goes without saying that this attracted the curiosity of scientists working to preserve humankind. It's surprising that Pleistocene nematodes can survive having their entire bodies frozen, especially without suffering any negative repercussions. They're shielded in some way from oxidation and ice's destructive effects. Cryomedicine and astrobiology are two medical specialities where this unknown method could be extremely helpful. 3. Liquid sulfur. The summit depth of the Daikoku volcano, which is located in the northern Mariana Islands, is approximately -1,060 feet. Given that the volcano's height is around 7,152 feet, that might not seem all that spectacular. A lake of pure molten sulfur, however, is one of the most unusual sights on Earth and can be seen inside the Daikoku volcano's crater. The only other place we know about where pure molten sulfur occurs is on one of Jupiter's moons called Io. You almost certainly can't afford the fuel to travel there, so unfortunately you're unlikely to see this event firsthand. The volcano's pit of churning black ooze, appropriately called the cauldron, burns at a scorching 369 degrees Fahrenheit. Although the white smoke that comes from one of the nearby craters hints that there may be more molten sulfur down there, we haven't yet been able to investigate it in great depth. But if more sulfur is discovered in the area, the region as a whole may simply contain the key to understanding the beginnings of life. The long-held but much disputed Gaia theory claims that the entire planet is a single, self-regulating organism where all life and non-life work together to keep it alive. By catching part of this sulfur and releasing it into the atmosphere, scientists want to determine if it can be returned to land. If so, sulfur may be the catalyst for Earth's ability to nourish and sustain life, suggesting that there might be something to the Gaia theory after all. Do you think there could be life on Jupiter's moon Io? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. 2. Icebergs. When most people think about the dangers in the ocean, a shark attack is the first thing that comes to mind, or perhaps getting lost at sea. But the truth is, neither of those two examples pose a threat quite like icebergs. For thousands of years, icebergs have been around and, without question, they're one of the most striking formations in the world. An iceberg is essentially a mass of floating freshwater ice that's detached from a glacier or ice shelf, and typically they're more than 16 feet wide. Some of the larger ones are bigger than cities such as Manhattan, Los Angeles, or Chicago. The famous Titanic, along with many other ships that have sunk, is unfortunate evidence that icebergs have great potential to cause danger. Though icebergs are extremely large, only about 1/10 of the formulation is visible above the water's surface, which is where part of the danger stems from. This fact alone makes it rather difficult for sea travelers to determine its size accurately. The International Ice Patrol, a company that keeps an eye on icebergs in the North Atlantic and Arctic Oceans, was created as a result of so many tragic accidents involving massive chunks of ice. Because of their patrols and reports, ships are now able to navigate through busy marine shipping routes and avoid potentially fatal collisions. Icebergs mostly form in the North Atlantic Ocean near Greenland, but they're also found near Antarctica in the Southern Ocean. After they break off from glaciers, ice shelves, or from a larger iceberg through a process called calving, the icebergs typically travel with the ocean's currents. They'll either end up in the ocean or they'll crash against the land where they were formed. According to the Goddard Institute for Space Studies at NASA, the overall temperature of the planet has risen by 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880. This has resulted in large icebergs becoming more common in ocean waters. The glaciers and ice shelves are more prone to developing cracks due to the higher temperatures, and water on the ice's surface makes those cracks wider until they finally reach a breaking point. Additionally, as more ice melts beneath glaciers and ice sheets, icebergs will move faster into the ocean. In 2000, the Ross Ice Shelf in Antarctica birthed iceberg B-15. It measured 159 miles long and was 20 miles wide. In the years that followed, B-15 began to shrink and eventually broke up into two smaller pieces. After 23 years, a small piece of it is still floating around the ocean, but back then it was known as the largest iceberg in recorded history. The topic of icebergs became popular and appealing after the sinking of the Titanic. The size of the iceberg that caused one of the most tragic and famous disasters, which was 400 feet long and 100 feet high, doesn't even compare to the biggest icebergs that are floating around the world's oceans. In truth, it was one of the smaller ones. But if a tiny iceberg can rip into a massive ship, it's hard to imagine what a large one would be capable of. That's exactly the reason why we track icebergs today, and it's why forming the International Ice Patrol was so important. It's necessary to provide some level of protection to defend against these occurrences. The most recent iceberg breakoff occurred in January 2023, which is the second breakoff to happen in the area. Measuring a whopping 598 square miles, it's separated from the 492-foot-thick Brunt ice shelf, which is said to be nearly the size of Greater London. The iceberg, named A76A, is currently known as the largest remaining piece of what was once the biggest iceberg floating around in the world's oceans. It broke away from the Ron ice shelf in May 2021 and measured 1,668 square miles. That's much larger than the state of Rhode Island and surpasses the size of Manhattan multiple times. However, it's still only a third the size of the B-15 iceberg. The dimensions were proven via satellite imagery, but just a month after detaching from the ice shelf, it broke down into three smaller pieces known as bergy bits. The breakup of an iceberg typically happens after they reach warmer waters. Iceberg A76A, the largest of the three baby bergs, measured an impressive 84 miles long and 16 miles wide. According to reports, A76A is currently floating around the deep waterway known as the Drake Passage. It connects the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans between Cape Horn in South Africa and the South Shetland Islands to the north of the Antarctic Peninsula. According to Earth Observatory, the mighty Antarctic Circumpolar Current drives icebergs east before they're thrown northbound near the equator, where icebergs meet their fate in water that's too warm for them to thrive. 1. Kraken. When you hear about a giant squid, You likely conjure images of old-time sailors being attacked by a massive sea monster. You might imagine huge eyes and impossibly long tentacles ripping a schooner in half with relative ease. And, unfortunately, the truth about these giant creatures is just as terrifying. The scientific community knows little or nothing about the habits of these squids, and so you may be wondering, where did they go? But unfortunately, all researchers really know is what they've heard from tall tales and what they've seen from poor quality pictures. For a long time, scientists have debated whether or not the giant squid is even a real species. The myth goes back to an account from King Sverre of Norway. In this obscure ancient document, Sverre talks about many different sea monsters, with the kraken being the largest and most terrifying. And, thanks to the king's story, the kraken was immediately placed in Norse mythology. The legend of a massive squid was so widespread that it even made it into the first modern scientific surveys of the natural world in 18th century Europe. The fact that the giant squid is so elusive does nothing to dispute the legends. Up until recently, all scientists could manage to get was a small glimpse of tentacles or a flash of this mysterious creature going by. When the remains of a massive squid were discovered on a Danish coast in 1853, the myth of the kraken was transformed into reality. Strangely, the enormous squid was just as baffling as the legend that it gave rise to, and we know very little about it because it occupies such a deep underwater habitat. On September 30th, 2004, Tsunami Kubodera with the National Science Museum of Japan and whale watcher Kiyoshi Mori captured the first images of a living giant squid in its natural environment. They dropped a 3,000-foot line baited with squid and shrimp over the side of their 5-ton fishing boat on their third journey to a renowned sperm whale hunting area located 602 miles south of Tokyo. And this was where the amazing photographs of the giant squid were captured. After more than 20 attempts that day, a massive squid measuring 26 feet attacked the bait and its tentacle became caught. Then, in the Gulf of Mexico in 2019, Nathan Robinson, an independent researcher based in Valencia, Spain, caught another glimpse of the legendary species while examining footage from a camera intended for covertly watching deep-sea cephalopods. The video is the most recent to emerge from a camera system that was used to record giant squid in deep seas off the coast of Japan in 2012. Since then, the system has also recorded at least 2 other species of elusive deep-sea squids. The camera's discreet design and specialized bait, which are essential to the observation of these intelligent critters, were detailed by Robinson and his team. The technology has the ability to shed light on the deep ocean secrets, which is our planet's biggest and least studied environment. The Medusa camera, a 3-foot cube weighing more than 200 pounds, is used for surveillance. The inventor of the camera knew that deep-sea cephalopods avoid typical sample techniques like trawling nets and noisy light submersibles due to their intellect and acute eyesight. The stealthy Medusa, on the other hand, glides across the deep without making a sound because it utilizes red light illuminators, which are invisible to deep-sea animals. It also has low-light cameras on board. In order to draw in predators like the giant squid, they attach an electronic bait called an e-jelly to the camera. The natural light that many deep-sea creatures produce from their bodies is known as bioluminescence, and the twirling LED lights of the e-jelly imitate a particular jellyfish species' bioluminescent alarm signal. Deep-sea squids are drawn to the lights, despite the fact that they aren't known to consume jellyfish, because they may potentially make a meal of the alleged aggressor. One video clip provided scientists with important insights into the behavior of giant squids. The footage disproved popular theories that the creatures are immobile predators who wait for prey to approach them. Instead, it showed that the squid stalked the e-jelly before planning its attack. According to Robinson, the fact that it was tracking the electronic bait adds to the evidence that these are animals that actively hunt their prey. At long last, they've proven the existence of these magnificent creatures. Hopefully, in the near future, we'll get to see much more of the amazing creatures and learn more about its habits as technology continues to evolve. 3. Battle of Narvik. When World War II broke out in 1939, Norway declared its neutrality. But the country was strategically important to both sides of the conflict, and there was no way to avoid being a target for occupation. Hitler was especially determined to capture Norway's northernmost port city of Narvik. As an all-weather port that operated through the winter while most of the Baltic Sea was frozen over, control of Narvik would guarantee the ability to receive year-round shipments of iron ore from Sweden. It would also stop the British from creating a blockade that would threaten to cripple the German war effort. The British were interested in taking the remote port for similar reasons, and because they saw it as an opportunity to shut down Germany's iron ore shipments. Ignoring Norway's insistence on maintaining neutrality, both the Nazis and the British began planning out how they would seize control of Narvik. On April 9, 1940, German forces attacked all 6 of Norway's main ports, marking the beginning of the Norwegian campaign. 5 destroyers occupied the harbor at Narvik, and the Germans captured the port without firing a single shot. The next day, 5 British destroyers sailed toward the harbor under the command of Captain Bernard Armitage Warburton Lee. With little intelligence to go on, all he really knew was that a small German force had supposedly taken Narvik. He sincerely doubted that the Germans would capture the port with just a handful of troops, but was under orders to act aggressively either way. Along the way, some Norwegians told Warburton Lee about the number of German ships in the harbor. The commander realized he was outnumbered and was also worried that the Nazis had laid mines in the port's waters. But in keeping with the Royal Navy's tradition of fighting fiercely and stopping at nothing to achieve victory, Warburton Lee ordered his destroyers to proceed onward with plans to attack the better-equipped German ships at high tide the next morning. Much to his advantage, the Germans weren't expecting a counterattack, and they weren't monitoring radio communications for intel, which would have tipped them off to the enemy presence. The British vessels approached in heavy fog and snow, effectively concealing them from view, and they managed to accidentally navigate slightly off-route, which enabled them to avoid the detection of a passing German ship. Warburton Lee's forces fired first, and the British quickly overwhelmed the German ships in the port. But the commander made a fatal mistake when he decided to return to the site for a final attack. He was unaware that there were more German destroyers out in the bay, and that the ships would converge on the site right as the British approached. Warburton Lee was killed in the attack, and 3 British destroyers were lost. The fighting continued into late June, with the Norwegian military receiving continued support from the British, French, and Polish militaries. On May 28th, the Allies recaptured Narvik from the Nazis, marking World War II's first Allied victory and a major defeat for Germany. At the same time, the Nazis were advancing into France, and staving off the invasion was a bigger priority than maintaining Allied control of Norway. The Norwegian campaign couldn't continue without Allied support, so it didn't. King Haakon and several Norwegian officials fled to London, where they established a government in exile, and Germany seized control of Norway. If Norway did pick a side during the war, what side do you think they would have gone with? Tell us your answer and why in the comments below, and hit subscribe while you're at it. 2. Battle of Dakar. After France fell to the Nazis in 1940, General Charles de Gaulle became the self-declared leader of the Free French forces who opposed the newly installed German-backed Vichy government. France's colonial territories in Africa became similarly divided, with some siding with Vichy leadership, while others supported the Free French. De Gaulle's reasons for attempting to take control of French West Africa were twofold. He saw the population as a reserve of soldiers to tap into for support in retaking France, and he knew the colonies would pose a threat to the Allies if they fell into Axis hands. He had additional reasons for targeting Dakar, the capital of the former colony of French West Africa and the modern-day capital of Senegal. Before the Vichy conquest of Dakar, Belgium, Poland, and France had transferred their gold reserves there. By gaining control of the territory, the Allies would secure critical economic assets. Dakar was also a major port city, and de Gaulle saw it as an entry point to achieving power over more far-flung territories. In a mission codenamed Operation Menace, he teamed up with British military commanders in a plot to capture Dakar, the capital of the former colony of French West Africa and the modern-day capital of Senegal. A joint British and French detachment was dispatched to carry out the mission in early July. At first, they avoided physical combat. De Gaulle was fairly confident that he could persuade the Vichy forces at Dakar to join in the fight against the Nazis without resorting to violence. But he overestimated his abilities and the invasion was messy from the beginning. De Gaulle's troops made an amphibious approach despite being completely untrained in amphibious warfare, and they were met with immediate gunfire from the soldiers at Dakar's naval base, who refused to back down at all costs. It quickly became evident that the Vichy forces were not going to allow the Allied invaders to come ashore without fiercely resisting their entry. The fighting at Dakar continued into the night, and the Free French and British began to wonder if they should withdraw. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill instructed them to stop at nothing and fight to the end. But the Vichy forces proved to be tougher than anyone had anticipated, and the Allied losses were accumulating. At that point, de Gaulle realized that the only options were to intensify the attack, which would put civilian lives at risk, or to accept defeat and leave despite Churchill's insistence on continued fighting. The battle was clearly a lost cause for the Allies, and they retreated. They later learned that the Vichy governor had felt similarly about how things were going from their side of the battle and was considering surrendering before the Allies left. For the British, Operation Menace was a humiliating failure. De Gaulle felt the same way. The failed attempt at capturing Dakar exposed his strategic shortcomings and damaged his standing among the Allies. Even after a subsequent victory at the Battle of Gabon later that year, de Gaulle had failed to wholly repair the damage to his reputation. French West Africa declared its loyalty to Vichy France following the disastrous Dakar raid. Despite the setback, de Gaulle continued campaigning for Free French support. He established a base in Cameroon, and within 2 years, all but one of France's African colonies were under Free French control. The Battle of Dakar happened during a broader Allied effort known as the North African Campaign, which lasted from June of 1940 to May of 1943. Following the failed invasion, the Allies launched an invasion into French North Africa known as Operation Torch. In addition to the objective of recapturing Vichy-occupied territories, the operation gave US forces a chance to engage in limited-scale battles against the Germans. Operation Torch began on November 8, 1940, with a three-pronged attack on the coastal cities of Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers. The Allies achieved quick victory despite meeting some fierce resistance at the beginning of the invasions, and within 8 days, it was clear that the Vichy forces were at a major disadvantage. In exchange for his cooperation, Vichy French Force Commander Admiral François Darlan was installed as High Commissioner of the new controlling Free French, and many Vichy officials also kept their jobs. He was assassinated soon after the transfer of power from the Vichy to the Free French took place, and former Vichy officials were gradually replaced with Free French leaders. While Dakar remained under Vichy control, the Allied victory over Morocco and Algeria was a major blow to the Vichy regime and to the Axis powers in general. The importance of Operation Torch in the Allied war effort has historically been overlooked in popular narratives and teachings of World War II. In addition to its short-term effects, the operation also laid the groundwork for post-war US policy in the Middle East. 1. Aleutian Islands Campaign. In June of 1942, a small Japanese force occupied the remote and sparsely populated islands of Attu and Kiska in Alaska's Aleutian Islands. At first glance, it's hard to understand how these barren volcanic landmasses, which are known for their challenging terrain and unforgiving climate, could be of any strategic value. Here, one can expect to routinely encounter thick fog, high winds, bitter cold, and frequent rain and snow. Japan attacked the Aleutian Islands, partially as a diversionary tactic, hoping to draw US forces away from Midway Atoll so the Japanese would have an easier time taking the island. They also believed taking the Aleutians would prevent the US from waging an attack across the northern Pacific. To the Americans, the presence of a Japanese base in Alaska represented the threat of future attacks on major West Coast cities like Anchorage, Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. In the first attack on the continental US in 130 years, Japan initiated the campaign with a 2-day aerial bombing of the US Army Air Force Base at Dutch Harbor on Unalaska Island. Little damage was done to the base thanks to the swift response of the American military. A few days later, the Japanese inflicted a second, much more organized air attack and consequently caused a lot more damage. American forces located the nearby Japanese aircraft carriers, but bad weather prevented them from counterattacking. Hindered from any further action at Dutch Harbor due to the weather, the Japanese occupied the islands of Attu and Kiska. At first, American military officials paid relatively little attention to their presence. They were more focused on other aspects of the war, like preparing for combat in Europe and the South Pacific. In the initial aftermath of Japan's invasion of Attu and Kiska, the US response consisted of little more than occasional bombings. 2 months after the invasion, the US built an airbase on nearby Adak Island and began attacking the Japanese at Kiska and patrolling the area with submarines and ships. Throughout the campaign, the Americans evacuated indigenous villages in the Aleutians that were home to the Unangaks, also known as the Aleuts. Nearly 900 people were forced onto ships and relocated to the cramped confines of so-called duration villages throughout Alaska. Each person was only allowed to take 1 suitcase of belongings, and they watched as US servicemen lit their churches, homes, and other buildings on fire to prevent them from falling into Japanese hands. Authorities told indigenous communities that they were being moved for their safety, but the inhumane conditions they suffered at their makeshift camps felt anything but safe. People were placed in abandoned canneries, mining camps, and other dilapidated buildings that lacked electricity and plumbing. The food and water were dirty and inadequate, and residents lacked proper winter clothing. They defied the military's attempts to cut them off from contact with nearby villages and towns, and got jobs so they could earn money and upgrade their living conditions. The Japanese also relocated the Unangaks people, moving Attu's residents to internment camps in Southeast Asia. American forces attempted to retake Attu in May of 1943, amid inclement weather and with malfunctioning equipment. Troops also lacked sufficient landing vehicles and beaches to land on, and were therefore unable to bring all their cold weather equipment to shore. Their vehicles couldn't operate on the tundra, preventing soldiers from getting where they needed to go, and many suffered from frostbite. The fighting continued for nearly 20 days before ending with an American victory. More US soldiers were harmed by the effects of the severe cold than anything else, with around 1,200 suffering weather-related injuries. An estimated 1,148 were wounded in combat, 614 succumbed to disease, and 549 died in combat. From Attu, the Americans proceeded to Kiska accompanied by Canadian troops, unaware that the Japanese had evacuated. In fact, they had left 2 weeks earlier unnoticed, fleeing under the cover of fog. The US military managed to decode Japanese correspondence detailing the abandonment of Kiska, yet the Americans continued to attack the deserted base for 3 weeks in a campaign known as Operation Cottage. During their time there, they faced an equally harsh environment to the one they encountered on Attu. Despite no combat taking place, 313 troops died for various reasons, including friendly fire, disease, booby traps and bombs left behind by the Japanese, vehicle accidents, and frostbite. Japan's invasion of Alaska came as a shock to the American people, who couldn't believe that the Japanese had managed to take over land on US soil. In the years since, the Aleutian Islands campaign has been overshadowed by other major events from the conflict, earning it the nickname of the Forgotten Battle and the Forgotten Front. But the Aleutian campaign wasn't inconsequential. In hindsight, there's no saying what might have happened if the US had lost one of its own territories to the Japanese. The experience in the Aleutians also gave the Americans a preview of the island-hopping battles that would continue throughout the Pacific for the duration of the war. Thanks for watching. In your opinion, which one of these battles helped war efforts the most? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.